Now, other things included in setting that are known, again, from scientific literature to be very influential in terms of the experience that one has and to bias things towards a positive experience are, again, safety, eye mask, but also the presence of music. Now, when I first heard about this from one of the premier researchers on psilocybin and other psychedelics, which is Robin Carhart-Harris. He's a professor at University of California, San Francisco, who's one of the major pioneers in the studies of psychedelics. And when he first started telling me about the critical role that music plays, I thought, okay, that makes sense. Music can impact our emotion, impact the way that we think, and could therefore impact what one experiences during the psychedelic journey. But he really underscored for me the extent to which music is not just a sort of incidental feature of the setting in psychedelic setting, but that it is one of the major drivers of the actual cognitive and emotional experience that somebody has on something like psilocybin that allows the psilocybin journey to be looked at or viewed not just as beneficial, but, and this is quoted in the scientific literature, as one of the most profound and important positive experiences that one ever experienced in their life. So let's talk about the sorts of music that have been used in these clinical studies. Well, first of all, we need to think about how long the psilocybin journey itself is going to be. And the typical duration of the psilocybin journey is anywhere from 4 to 6 hours. It's going to depend somewhat on dose. It's going to depend somewhat on variability in people's liver metabolism. And it's also going to depend somewhat on how much food people have in their gut. In all the clinical studies that I read, it was advised that people not have any food in their gut at the time at which they ingest or are injected with the psilocybin. It's particularly true if people are going to be taking psilocybin mushrooms in order to get their psilocybin. And that has been done in a few studies. Most studies, however, use synthetic psilocybin taken orally. Again, that's converted to psilocin in the gut by the acidity of the gut. And the acidity of the gut is going to be impacted by the various foods that people eat. And so that's one of the major reasons why people are advised to not eat for at least 4 hours prior to the psilocybin journey. So here we've got this 6-hour, what we're calling journey, because that's what everyone calls it, or trip, that people start experiencing about 30 to 45 minutes after ingesting psilocybin or taking psilocybin. There's a peak component in which there's a maximal intensity of emotion, and often that's also associated with anxiety. And this is very important to understand. The anxiety component is part of what in the therapeutic setting they refer to as ego dissolution. And that anxiety around the peak, and I think most people would probably hear peak experience and think, oh, we're talking about a peak positive experience. But no, we're referring to a peak experience and anxiety that people stay with and then come down from gradually as one goes from the second or third hour after taking psilocybin, and that tapers off slowly toward the 6-hour mark, what sometimes people refer to as parachuting back in. Of course, they're not, hopefully, I would very much hope people aren't actually parachuting back in while on psilocybin, but I think you get the idea. The music that's typically played in the clinical studies using psilocybin for the treatment of depression or for compulsive disorders or addiction tends to have a particular contour that matches with and can also drive that contour of the psilocybin journey that I just described. Again, we're talking about people wearing an eye mask with guides present, so people who are not taking psilocybin there as well to ensure that the person feels supported and is safe. The person is typically lying down, sometimes sitting down, but more often than not lying down, wearing an eye mask. And the music that's played at the beginning of the psilocybin session tends to be music that doesn't have a lot of vocalizations. It tends to be things like classical music. It tends to be fairly low volume, but that then transitions into music that has a lot of percussion, so often drums. That tends to be higher volume, that has a lot of intensity at about the time that one would be experiencing the peak in emotion and in perception, the so-called peak of the journey. That intense music tends to be played for about 45 minutes to 90 minutes, depending on the study one looks at, and then tends to transition into softer music again, sometimes choral type or more melodic music, often female voices in particular, and then transition into nature sounds and things that more or less mimic the outside natural world and less so synthetic things like drums or instruments and vocalizations and things of that sort.